Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us today. As you know, we are here to talk about CDPs or customer data platforms. My name is Giovanni Lorenzoni. I will be with David Raab with half an hour of conversation on this topic. So let's talk about customer data platform. They're becoming another buzzword used in the data marketing space, and more businesses are using this tool as a go solution to manage their customer data and associated use cases. So it's a growing hot topic, and yet it's also a quite complicated one. We think it's a good time to come together to address some of the main themes about CDPs today. Maybe you are joining us today because you are looking for a particular data management solution, or maybe you're just about to invest in one. Whatever situation, we hope to clarify some points that are not so straightforward to help you find the best solution for your business. If there is something specific which you are hoping for that we don't cover in this thought leadership conversation, please reach out to us and we would love to help you. As partners of the CDP Institute, we are really happy to have David Raab here with us for this. As founder of the CDP Institute, he is an important leader and expert in this field. Hi, David. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Hi, Giovanni. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Good morning, everyone. Or afternoon.
David, it's a pleasure. I'm glad you are well and have managed to join us live despite the rather big time difference there in America. So I can say good morning to you. Before we move on, I should introduce myself. I'm Giovanni Lorenzoni, chair at BitBang. We provide data management, analytics, and intelligence consulting services to help businesses grow by enabling a culture of data-driven decision at scale, help our clients reach their objective. Without further ado, let's move straight on to our conversation. Again, of course, if you have a question to ask at any point during our conversation, we will try to answer them too. Let's start off with the most imperative concept then. David, the definition of a CDP is not something new. If I well recall, you define customer data platforms as a category, as a software category back in 2013. Now the term is on the rise and the market awareness of its proposition has grown exponentially. So I guess my first question would be, what is a customer data platform?
Certainly. So you're right. I did define it in 2013, and the definition took a little while to be solidified, but the official CDP Institute definition right now is it's packaged software that builds a persistent, unified customer database accessible to other systems. And all those are very important terms. It's packaged software. It's not a custom built project, which is the way before CDPs customer databases got built. And of course, it's much easier to be able to buy a CDP off the shelf and then tune it to your company than it is to build it. Persistent unified customer database means just what it says, but there are other ways of dealing with customer data that don't store it persistently. Persistent just means it's stored somewhere. You could look it up in the source systems in real time, for example, but there are some issues with that. You really need to pull it out into its own data store. Unified in particular means that it's bringing that single customer view, so it's organizing the data from a customer perspective and bringing all information about each customer into the same place to build a profile. And then accessible to other systems, again, simply means what it says, that other systems can use the CDP, so it's one source for any system that wants customer data rather than having each system build its own database or having a database that only some systems can share. So it's a pretty important concept.
Okay, but if you want to try to make sense of the entire MarTech landscape, how do CDP fits with an existing stack?
So companies today have many systems with customer data in them. Uh, not uncommon to have 30 or 40 or 100 in a large company, sources of data that have been actually feeding the CDP that have customer data from someplace. And similarly, companies have a great many channels, delivery systems, and the CRM, the web, the mobile DMP, whatever it is, that are going to use the customer data. So we at the CDP Institute have a rather CDP-centric view of the world, so we tend to draw it with the CDP sitting right in the middle, taking data from all of those source systems, consolidating it, doing the things we just discussed, and then sharing it out to all of the delivery systems. So in our viewpoint, it sits right in the middle of everything. Other people might draw it a little differently, but the fact remains, however you draw it, there are connections on both sides, feeding data in and taking data out. But on the other hand, it doesn't directly interact with your customers. Some CDPs might deliver messages, but that's not the core function of the CDP. Similarly, some CDPs might take do some transaction processing, but that's not the core of the CDP. The core of the CDP is to just be in the middle there, take data from one place and move it to another.
Okay, we receive several times the same question from our customers. So, which is, how can I know if a CDP is the right MarTech solution for my business? At what point is it necessary to explore this solution further?
Well, the joke at the CDP Institute is you ask 3 questions. Do you have customer data? And yeah, everybody has customer data. Is your customer data perfect and perfectly accessible? No, no one has. So then you must need a CDP. So everybody needs a CDP. But if you want to be a little less flippant about it, you can perhaps go to the next slide and look at the question of, well, what do I want to do? Which is a function of what's my strategy and what are my resources, which tells me what marketing programs or business programs I want to run. And those tell me my use cases. What specific things do I want to do? The second question then is, well, what's stopping me from doing what I want to do? Where are my gaps in my systems? What don't my systems let me do that I need to do to run the programs that I want to run? And then the third question, is CDP the best solution? Because it could be that the gap is not a CDP problem. Maybe the gap is you have a bad email system, or the gap is your order processing system doesn't capture the right data. Those are not problems usually that a CDP is going to solve. So you have to kind of go through these 3 fundamental questions to understand, where are my problems, and really, is the CDP the best way to solve it?
Okay, clear. Why can't we confuse a CDP with a CRM system or a DMP?
It's certainly easy to confuse them. They all store customer data. So that's the place that people kind of get stuck, is like, well, I already have a CRM, I already have a DMP. Why would I need another system to store my customer data? And the reality is that each of those systems has a different function. It was built for a different purpose. Can we go to the next slide? And it has different strengths and weaknesses. So your data warehouse, for example, well, first of all, data warehouses usually are not packaged software, built custom, but data warehouses really aren't built necessarily to bring together all the data. They don't only bring together some data, usually the structured data, like the transactions. So they don't build that complete view. A data lake, on the other hand, often has all the data, but it doesn't usually build the customer view, the unified view that's just kind of a big lake of data that people dive into. The tag manager or the integration hub or the integration platform, those don't store the data. They don't have a persistent database. They just simply move data from one system on the other on request. So each of these systems, then you get your marketing automation system and your CRM system. And again, they are packaged and they do store data, but they don't store all the data. By and large, they only store the data that they generate. So it's not a complete view. And they're really not designed to share the data out with the other systems. They really are designed to assemble a database and just use it for themselves. DMPs, which are probably the most often confused with CDP, probably because they were sold as the place to store all your customer data, all your first-party data, exactly what a CDP promises as well. And DMPs, particularly in Europe, more so in the US, were way oversold. They really are not designed for that. They're designed really to deal with cookies. They have a very particular technical approach that makes it very fast to access a limited amount of data, and a limited amount of data could be 2,000 or 3,000 attributes. So it's not like it's 10 attributes, but they can't store the raw transaction detail, for example, or the raw browser history detail. That would be tens of thousands of attributes, just because of the way things work. So the DMP doesn't really have the capability to store all the detail that a CDP can store. So again, it's simply not suited for the same things that the CDP is suited.
Sure. And in terms of capabilities, what are the main core capabilities of a CDP?
Okay, so again, the going back to our definition, the CDP has to be able to ingest all the data. So you have features related to ingestion. Kelly, can we go next? That are pull it in, clean it, transform it as necessary, do the linking, do the aggregation, so calculating things like lifetime value, for example, or other kinds of derived variables, and then exposing it. So usually means putting in enough, because it could be a different data store that exposes it that's queryable than the one that assembles the data, which often is a data store that's good at storing a lot of data, but not really at making it available for querying. And then usually all the CDPs can do segmentation as well. You want to pull out groups of customers. You also usually have an API access or query access to get at the data directly, but in practice, all of them also have a segmentation ability, so they can push out audiences to different systems. And then many, but not all, the CDP have these additional functions doing predictive modeling or measurement, like attribution, for example, or personalization or orchestration. Not too many of them are going to do budget or content, but someplace in your systems you need those capabilities. And then that's usually where the CDP ends. A small number will have some capabilities like pushing, serving web ads, for example, banner ads on a website, or even acting as a DMP, although, as I say, it's hard for a CDP technology to have a DMP capability because the technical requirements are different. But you could have another database within the CDP that's tuned to do what a DMP does. But usually the CDP functions are really those data, they all do the data ones, and some of them do the decisioning ones that I've listed there.
Okay. You just said many, but not all. So I guess not all CDPs are created equal. Are there different types of CDPs?
Well, there most certainly are. And again, what they have is they all have that set of data functions. So Kelly, go ahead to the next slide. And the ones that only do the data functions, we call data CDPs. We don't spend a lot of energy naming things here. Some have the data capabilities plus the predictive analytics, model building. Might be, artificial intelligence or machine learning, or it might be the more traditional kind of predictive model building that's done more by experts. But in any event, some of those have that. So those are analytics CDPs. Some have the message selection capabilities, so they can decide what's the right personalized message for an individual, either in real time, say during a web interaction or a call center interaction, or simply for outbound audience lists for email or direct mail or whatever, or display advertising to an audience. And we label them here as campaign CDPs. And then again, some have the delivery functionality. They can actually could send an email message or even create a personalized web page. Some actually even include operational capabilities like the source system, like say order processing. So each of those has its own class. Again, what makes it a CDP is they have that data capability. The ones that are down there doing all the delivery and all the operational functions, those are complicated and demanding applications in their own right. So in that case, we think it's a little silly to call that email system that has a CDP a CDP. We think it's really an email system. with a CDP inside, or again, an e-commerce platform with a CDP inside. So we tend to make that distinction. But again, it has to do all the things that a CDP does for us to class it as a CDP, regardless of what else it can do.
Okay. CDPs, in my mind, are often associated with the concept of single customer view. Can you please elaborate on this concept?
Certainly, I think we don't have a slide for this one, but the single customer view is this notion of taking all the data of the customer from all the places in your company that have gathered it, and again, dozens is actually quite common, and putting it in one place, which requires matching, because this has an email address, and that has a telephone number, and that has a postal address, and that has a cookie ID. So each source has its own personal identifier. So there's a matching capability that has to happen to bring all that data together. And that's a very difficult thing to do. Once you've done the matching, then you want to take the data that's associated with each ID, so all the data that's associated with this email address, all the data that's associated with this telephone number, and so on, pull that together, which again requires a certain amount of standardization, because the the item numbers that are used in the online system might not be the same as the item numbers that are used in the retail store inventory system, for example. So you might have to somehow merge those two together, standardize them and normalize them, and even data formats, things like date and so on, might be different in different systems. So there's a fair amount of work to bringing that data all together, kind of creating a clean, unified picture of everything you know about the customer, and then making that available. So that's the notion of the single customer view. And the reason you care about that is that you want to know everything you can about the customer, so that when you interact with them, you're first of all recognizing and showing them that you recognize who they are and what they've done, so that you can treat them based on the knowledge of what they've done in the past, because they know that, and they just assume that you know that because they've been trained by Amazon and people like that to have that capability, and they just assume everybody else has that capability too. Well, Amazon was built to do nothing but that from the ground up. So it's not easy for Amazon. Amazon obviously has extremely sophisticated technology. It was very hard to create. But for the rest of us who weren't built from the ground up, it's even harder to kind of retrofit that unified view onto what were often separate systems, and still are separate systems. But in any event, the customers just don't care. They just think we should do that. So they expect us to have that unified view. And then once we do have that unified view, then we can make the best offer at the best moment. So treat the customer in ways that are the most effective for making that customer happy. So it's very important to have that unified view. The other caveat, I would put actually two other caveats. One is that we never really have all the data, or at least I hope we don't. You don't know what I had for breakfast. There's no way for you to know that. And secondly, there are privacy issues that are increasingly prominent that are making it harder to gather data. People are a little less eager to share their data and more careful about what they share. And they also make it harder to get information from third parties because they may not be allowed to share it. So the unified customer view may actually be getting harder rather than easier due to privacy in particular, but it's still very important. And certainly the customers expect us to use that data for the customer's advantage. So we do have to collect it, and we do have to use it well. If you use it just to send them little personalized messages that they find annoying, then you probably shouldn't send those messages. But there are a lot of valid, good uses for the customer data that the customers actually expect you to have and want you to have and appreciate you having.
Okay, thank you. So another question which I think is very important to pose you is related to use cases. So what are the main use cases for a CDP? Where does a CDP fits in terms of covering missing use cases, if you will?
Okay, so again, going back to, if the CDP has all my customer data, then you might think, well, every use case that involves customer data is a CDP use case. And it's a little tempting if you're in the CDP vendor space to say, yeah, you got customer data. That's all for the CDP. But in reality, as I said earlier when I went through the selection process, there are some problems that involve customer data that the CDP doesn't solve. And there are other problems involving customer data that your existing systems have already solved. So you need to be that middle ground of what are the things that the CDP lets me do that I can't do without the CDP. So Kelly, could you advance? So that comes down to, okay, my CDP use cases are the use cases. Kelly, next slide. I thought you fell asleep. I was really insulted for a moment. So the CDP use cases are the use cases that are made possible by the CDP, which means they're the use cases that need what a CDP does, what's unique to the CDP. And remember, we talked about there are all these other customer systems that have some capabilities that are the same as what a CDP can do. But there are certain things in that combination in particular of the unified shareable view that only the CDP does. So that's what a CDP use case does. The real CDP use cases that are unique to the CDP are the ones that, well, you need unified, persistent, accessible customer data. But to make it really short, they're the ones that involve data from more than one system. When we look at our lists and lists of CDP use cases, and we have many, many dozens, and many hundreds have been documented by different people, almost always comes down to it's a use case that has to share data across systems, because that's what the individual systems were not built to do. And that's what none of those other systems really makes possible. And that's what the CDP makes possible. So if you have a use case that wants to move data from your website to your call center, so the call center agent can see what the person on the phone did on the website a few minutes ago, or you want to move data from your retail sales up into your retargeting audience in email so you cannot send retargeting messages to people who bought something in the store or on the website for that matter. That's moving data between two systems, and those are the kinds of use cases that really are usually classic CDP use cases.
Okay, I think you somehow anticipated my next question, which is related to define use cases or to find use cases for a CDP. So it comes, the next question is, why are customer data platform more difficult to purchase than many other systems? So maybe, as you said, other systems are covering some of them already?
I don't know that I'd say they're more difficult. They're a little more, actually, no, they are more difficult. And the reason is that I know what an email system is supposed to do. I know what a CRM system is supposed to do. I know what an e-commerce system is supposed to do. So I have a pretty good idea. I probably have one already. So I can say, this is what my system does now. This is what I like about it. This is what I don't like about my, say, email system. So I know what to look for. I can sit down in front of it. I can watch a demo. I can see, that thing that he's doing, that's really hard in my system. That's so easy in this new system. Or on the other hand, he's doing this thing that takes 4 clicks in his system, but my current system can do that in 1 click. So people are relatively knowledgeable and sophisticated buyers for most existing technology, but the CDP is a new technology. It's not something they can say my current CDP does this, that, or the other, because they don't have a current CDP. So it's more difficult to buy because the buyers really are less knowledgeable about what to look for. They simply have less experience with it. Plus, what the CDP does, it's kind of vague and it's extremely broad. It's like all my customer data, share it with all other systems. That's really a lot of stuff. And I need to narrow that down when I'm selecting, say, well, these are the 5 sources that I need, and these are the 4 delivery systems that I need to connect to. Okay, so making that transition from the very broad definitions that we provide to the very specific needs that I have as a buyer is a fairly difficult thing. And that requires the use cases. Remember, think about our big flow chart earlier, starting with programs and defining use cases from that, and then specifying needs out of the use cases. Again, a lot of marketers don't have any particular training in use case creation. And use case creation is an art in itself. You have to really understand what the process is, possibly what the process is to do something you don't do today. So you don't actually have a process that you can just copy. You have to kind of think it through. And that's not an easy thing necessarily. And then what are the features required to do that process, which again is a sort of a mental transition that doesn't come natural to everyone. So there's a lot of challenges figuring out what that CDP really needs to, what you need to look for.
Sure. And tied to the previous one, would you assign the selection and the purchase of a CDP to a business function, or it's more of an IT function?
Well, it really needs to be both.
Or both, yeah.
Of course. We have actually done a fair amount of research on this, and the business people have to drive it. I mean, I'll just come out and say that, okay, sorry, IT people, if you're listening, we love you and we want you in the room, but we do not want you to run the process. We want you to help out, to provide the skills of things like use case development, which IT people are very good at, for example. But it's easy if you let the technical people be in charge. They get focused on the technical issues. Oh, what database does it use, and what's the horsepower, or whatever the metric is that you would care about such things, the latency, to use some fancy IT term that I actually could define, but it doesn't matter. But it really has to be driven by, well, what am I trying to accomplish from a business perspective? How can I use this system to do my business needs? And that's something that the business users understand. So you need them both in the room, both at the table, but it really has to be driven by the business people. Otherwise, you can get distracted by technical niceties that really don't determine the success or failure of the project.
Okay, and that it's time for, there are so many MarTech solutions and so many vendors around, even in the CDP space. So how can you be sure to find the right one that will really deliver value to your business?
Well, that again comes down to that process of starting with your programs that you want to run that you can't run, that the CDP is going to make possible for you to run. You then have to assess the value of those programs so you can determine which ones are really going to add a lot of value and which ones might be kind of cool and fun, but in fact, you don't think are going to make you a lot of money. And you prioritize accordingly. Then you find a CDP that, excuse me, will meet those requirements to perform those use cases in particular. And again, that's non-trivial to do all that, but that's how you do that. When you're in the actual buying process, probably the most important thing to do is make sure that you've tested the CDP against the specific needs that you've identified. So if it's really important for my CDP to have a built-in predicting model capability, just for example, which is not even a core CDP function, but a lot of CDPs do it. A lot of CDP buyers need that because a lot of their use cases require predictive modeling and they don't have a good predictive modeling capability. Well, I need to define, okay, what kind of, let me build a use case out. And let me say this use case requires a churn model. So let me, Mr. CDP vendor, or Ms. CDP vendor, let me see your system build a churn model for me. Don't just tell me you can do that with a wave of the hands. Actually show me. And when they show you, it may be that you put in 3 things and out pops a model on the other end, and that model score is on the customer record just magically, and that's about as good as it gets. Or it may be, oh, you want to build that model? Well, we'll call up Giovanni over here, and Giovanni will build us a model, and a month later he'll pop that into the system, and then we'll have a programmer spend another month converting that model algorithm into an actual calculation formula in the system, and then we'll have somebody else in another department take that model score and put it on the customer record, and 3 months from now you'll have a great churn model. So you don't know that until you actually ask them to walk you through the process of having that happen. So it's so important to build out those scenarios that say, okay, one of my use cases is churn reduction, and that use case requires assembling the data and building that predictive model and sending out the right messages to the right people. So I've identified building a predictive model as a key step within my use case. And now I want to have you, during your demonstration of your CDP that you're trying to sell to me, show me how that's going to work. Until you do that, or unless you do that, you can end up buying the wrong system.
Well, thank you, David. It's been great to have you here. I think we have given some clarity to the CDP world. I see some people have asked very specific question. So let me take a couple. I think we have a couple of minutes to try to answer. The first one is, what are the legal implications that organizations need to face when they add a CDP to their stack? As CDP is enabling full customer profiling, have such organizations updated their privacy cookie policies to specifically cover this purpose?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. so, so, so first of all, there are people whose job it is to answer this question and keep you out of jail, and I can't keep you out of jail, nor will I go to jail in your stead. So, that being said, my understanding, of course, this is something that we look at a lot at the CDP Institute, is that the CDP itself is not really creating any new purposes. The CDP is gathering data from other systems. So when the data was gathered, it should have been gathered appropriately with appropriate consents and notifications. Moving it within your own systems doesn't really change any of that. The good news is that the CDP, because it puts all the data in one place and does let you tag the data with the appropriate consents, and the CDP is a place to store those consents, for example, which you may not even have otherwise. The CDP lets you control how the data is used, so you can actually put processes in place that say, okay, this data is only usable for these kinds of purposes, so I'm going to run that through the CDP, and I'm going to put filters on the CDP that only let the right people or the right purposes use this data. So the CDP actually helps to comply with privacy regulations. It's almost always an advantage, not a disadvantage. From a privacy perspective. And some of the CDP vendors have built-in consent management modules or integrated with third-party modules. There's some that have done some integration with some of the other kinds of privacy systems, the data discovery. There's a whole bunch of privacy functions. We actually, as I say, have been doing a lot of work with privacy at the Institute because it's so important. But, you do have to be careful with the CDP to make sure that whatever your privacy officers tell you to do is what you're doing. Now, of course, if the CDP is a third-party processor, that's another set of rules. So you might need a contract or something to govern what they do if the CDP is not your own system. But again, that's all up to the compliance guys.
Okay, thank you. Apparently, few slides have flashed for a couple of seconds, so we jump back off one just to.
Only if someone wants to. This is
yeah. But just a reminder for the audience, we are going to send over the slides so you can follow the content.
So this is. Go ahead.
Final one, because we are running out of time. Can a CDP placed on top of an existing data warehouse so data cleansing and other transformation can be performed before data are ingested into the CDP?
Absolutely. If you already have your data well organized, either in a data warehouse or in a data lake, then there's no reason to go back out to the original source systems and download the same data a second time. You can certainly connect the CDP to either of those systems. If you remember back to our little chart that compared the different systems, both the data lake and the data warehouse have some overlapping capabilities, but not all the capabilities. So it saves a lot of work, and it's very common, in fact, for the CDP to connect to those sources because there's additional things that you're still going to want that CDP to do.
Well, thank you, David. We have been through quite a lot today, so I appreciate your sharing with us your knowledge about CDPs. Again, I think we have done some clarity around the topic. And but if you do have any further questions, this is for the audience, concern or like having an expert advice, we will happily set up a call with you. And please feel free to send us initial email at info@bitbang.com. Thank you all of you again, and to you, David, in particular, wishing you all a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe and goodbye. Ciao.
Ciao. All right. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.